Hello, welcome into the SFS channel and another rendition of rest of season fantasy football rankings. In this video, I'll be chatting through my top 30 wide receiver tiers and rankings moving forward. We're going to chat some strength of schedule, especially for that fantasy postseason. We're past the halfway marker here into double-digit week territory, if you know what I mean, week 10, adding a second digit to the week number. So moving into the latter part of the season and getting closer and closer to those make or break performances if you're not already there in terms of your team record as we make our way through this season. So as always, if you're looking for some help here on the channel, look no further than this one right here. We've got the comment section open as always down below. I get back to as many questions as I can every single week. We've got the community Discord server that can be found in the description of every single video here on the channel. And we've also got our week 10 playlist up on the channel live where you can check out any episode we've posted this week. And of course, just get the information you're looking for. So as always, I appreciate the heck out of you guys. And let's dive right on in to our top tier. Okay, so I'm not going to get super in depth in the top tier here with our number one tier. I said this in the running backs episode at some point, but don't pay too much attention to the numeric value. Like once we get down to like tier 5, you're gonna be wondering, how is this a tier 5 player? It just seems kind of odd, but it's really just there as a number. I struggle with what to name these tiers because when I use the alphabet, I feel like it just looks really dumb. It seems like we're grading the players, and then if we use numbers, it just seems a little bit too numeric centric. So if you guys have a suggestion for me, let me know down in the comment section below. But this is how we're doing it in today's episode. The top 4 here. Tyreek Hill kicking it off as my rest of season wide receiver 1. He is on a historic pace right now to actually outdo Cooper Kupp's yardage from last season. Now, at the end of the day, there is obviously a situation where strength of schedule plays a factor here, and Tyreek Hill happens to have the best rest of season schedule of any of these top 4 players. From here on out, no one has a particularly hard schedule, but other players do have average schedules here as we make our way towards the end of this season. We'll break that stuff down here in just a second, but I do feel Tyreek Hill right now with the ceiling he's providing on a week-to-week basis and the volume he's getting consistently is the number 1 player the rest of the way. Justin Jefferson may not actually be outscoring Cooper Kupp in terms of a consistent week-to-week basis. We'll talk about why Cooper Kupp's a little bit lower here in just a second. But for Jefferson, he's got an average strength of schedule going forward. He's been doing phenomenal things here this year. Of course, he is definitely in this elite tier every single week in terms of weekly rankings. He does have a below average postseason schedule, though, something to keep your eye on, meaning it's more difficult than the average schedule for a fantasy receiver the rest of the way. For Cooper Kupp, he's our wide receiver 3. The reason he is not number 2 or even number 1 is due to Matthew Stafford's health. We did get positive news on Friday afternoon that Matt Stafford is actually trending in the right direction. This is from Sean McVay. It could be total BS, just based, coach speak at the podium, but he's been in concussion protocol. I think it's somewhat of a cover-up for his elbow or some other ailment that he's dealing with. They haven't had him on the practice field. If he's banged up, and if we ever see John Wolford, that is a humongous disservice to Cooper Kupp. I just don't think this team's going to want to pass the ball at such a frequent rate. So for Tyreek Hill, we've seen it with Teddy Bridgewater this year. We've seen Skylar Thompson. It doesn't matter for him, and it shouldn't matter for Cooper Kupp. But I do think that team has Mike McDaniel's got some stones on him, and he's not afraid to air it out with those other quarterbacks. I'm not sure if Sean McVay will be willing to do quite the same thing here. And then in number 4, Stephon Diggs. Actually, one more thing on Cooper Kupp there. He does have an average cumulative schedule the rest of the way here and a below average strength of schedule for the fantasy playoffs. Stephon Diggs at number 4, a player that I absolutely trust every single week. But again, his quarterback is dealing with injuries here. I actually had Stephon ranked higher at the number 3 spot hearing the news about Stafford on Friday afternoon. And then we also got information that Josh Allen didn't practice for a 3rd straight day, and his status is still up in the air. He's still questionable, and there hasn't really been much insight on him. So both of these elite A-tier blue-chip wide receivers having some issues because it's a dependent position. It's not their fault, but it is something they are dealing with here. And again, for Stephon Diggs, he does have an average strength of schedule in both the cumulative rest of the season as well as his playoff schedule moving forward. Into our next tier now, Devontae Adams and A.J. Brown, my wide receivers 5 and 6. The rest of the way this season, it is a paper-thin margin between these two players. And at the end of the day, we are seeing a lot of turmoil in Las Vegas that could potentially be what kind of uproots Devontae and places A.J. Brown ahead of him down the stretch of this season. We'll see. but he's got himself a very good postseason schedule here. Of course, really good things to see for a near blue chip player here. The one issue has been sometimes Derek Carr just doesn't give him the volume he needs. Sometimes he doesn't give him the quality of targets that he needs. Sometimes he is not willing to put it on the line and throw into double coverage for Davante Adams. And that's affected his fantasy season. We've seen that so far. Last year, Aaron Rodgers, back shoulder fade, doesn't matter. No, we don't care. He goes out there and balls out and has an exceptionally high floor every single week he hits the field. That is not considerably the case here this season. And there's been, of course, a lot of dysfunction with this pretty trash Raiders team this season, or at least a team that's dealt with a lot of controversy throughout the year. A.J. Brown here, again, it's a paper-thin margin in terms of actual production and weekly lineup numbers. It's so close. And if at the end of the day, the prevailing situation is that A.J. Brown is in a better situation and they continue to have a strong offensive approach and attack every week, that might be what undoes me here or undoes me and makes me, wrong about this take. But at the end of the day, I'm uber confident in both these players, so don't read too much into the actual numeric ranking here. Loving A.J. Brown and what he brings to the table. He is an alpha wide receiver in a great offense right now, and he has an average strength of schedule throughout the postseason, which doesn't really influence my feelings in a positive or negative direction. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the thing with Davante's schedule being easier that really makes that difference for me. Next up, my wide receivers 7 and 8, D-Hop and Jalen Waddle. Now, for these players, they are on the cusp of being in that second tier as well. I do think there is a noticeable enough difference, though, to keep them down here. D-Hop has been very good since returning. However, this Cardinals offense hasn't necessarily been the most reliable, let's say that, about this team. There's been some internal dysfunction, and at the end of the day, I do still have my question marks and reservations about D-Hop staying healthy long-term this season. Now, he's given me no reason to be skeptical about that for this year. However, it is something that I do worry about, as that has been a trend over the last few seasons of his career. Once something flares up and once his body isn't feeling great, things tend to start to go south rather quickly with him. So, again, not trying to bash on him too much here. After all, he is my wide receiver 7 for the rest of this season. However, it is things that I'm actively thinking about here. He does have a slightly above average schedule down the stretch of this season. And then Jalen Waddle here, a guy who is basically the 1A in Miami's offense. The one thing he doesn't have on a week-to-week basis is the same target volume as Tyreek Hill does. But he's dynamite with the football in his hands. He's an absolute fantasy gold mine. This entire offense is right now. And at the end of the day, all it takes is a few touches for him to take the rock and go out there and put up really nice ceiling numbers. All right, next up here, my wide receivers 9 through 13. So 5 names we are talking through in this next tier here, kicking it off with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, this might be a bit of a spicy take here. We'll see what you guys think about it. I think there's a lot of panic going on in the community right now, a lot of stock dippage from him in terms of his outlook from other players. And the reasoning for that is simple. He has not hit on his ceiling since week 3, and that is problematic. He's dealt with an ankle and concussion health-related issues throughout the past, 6 or 7 weeks or so, and that stinks, and that's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is target volume. The bottom line is involvement in the offense. The bottom line is how many passes are you getting on a per-week basis? And for Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's been a very nice number. He's had 9 or more targets in each of his last 3 games where he played a full, healthy 60 minutes. Well, he didn't play 60 minutes, but you know what I mean. So, he has not scored a touchdown since week 2. Again, he had 3 in the first 2 games. That stinks. That sucks. That's holding him back from reaching his ceiling numbers. But what you have to bet on here, or at least what I'm betting on for this take, is the fact that that turns around a little bit. He can end this year like he started it. CeeDee Lamb, my one question mark and concern for CeeDee here is the fact that he has just 13 targets since Dak Prescott's return to this offense. He needs more volume. If Odell comes into this situation, that's troublesome. That's a situation that at the end of the day, you're not getting enough volume there. And they have not had a 100-yard receiver yet this season, just one of 2 teams to be in that category. So for me, it's a talent thing. It's hoping that he can turn it around. He was actually putting up decent numbers with Cooper Rush this season. I think there's still hope here for him to be a fringe wide receiver 1 this season, but at the end of the day, he's going to have to take this slightly above average schedule and really turn this into above average production from what we've been seeing as of late. He's getting in the end zone with Dak Prescott. Not like he's not putting up points, but to establish and maintain that floor, I want to see more involvement. We'll see if that happens. T. Higgins here. I think he has gotten absolutely snubbed as of late by some really, really weird game scripts. So it's week 8, I believe. I just literally punched the microphone, so I'm sorry about that. It's week 8 against the Browns. Turns into an absolute nightmare. Joe has no protection. He's getting sacked. He's getting hit. T ends up scoring a touchdown and barely salvaging his week. The next matchup, Joe Mixon scores 5 touchdowns, literally just washes the Carolina Panthers off the football field. No need to pass the football in that game. So you've got 2 games without Jamar Chase. The community is saying, hey, he's out. Why aren't you producing? I think it's been more of a circumstantial, unique situation that is unexpected, more so than it is T. Higgins being inept and not being able to put up these numbers. He's exceptionally talented, so I'm not very worried about that. I would be surprised to see Jamar Chase before, I believe it's the Week 13 game against Kansas City. So a few more opportunities, a couple more actually. They got the bye this week to make things happen here. Mike Evans, another guy who has exceptional volume, just isn't hitting on his ceiling. He's got 3 total touchdowns this season. Yeah, he's got 59 targets in his last 6 games. That's nearly 10 per contest. Drops. Big problem. Lots of missed fantasy points with those drops. Tom Brady, inefficient passing. They are throwing the football at an absurd rate and just not converting. It's all things that are adding up to a disappointing fantasy season, or at least based on our expectations or what the numbers point and, could ultimately end up being here. We're wanting more and we don't necessarily feel totally satisfied here. That's kind of been a constant with this tier. It's a lot of upside. It's a lot of potential. Not too much actual delivery on that potential, though, is what we're coming to find. It's not like these guys are stinking it up every single week, but we expect better from this group. And then DK, who has actually been very good since injuring his knee and getting carted off the field. He's come back and scored touchdowns in back-to-back games. He's got Tampa Bay this week. DK Metcalf's also got a fantastic strength of schedule in both the fantasy playoffs and his rest of season schedule. He's got a high ceiling. Gino's throwing that ball up to him. He's coming down, winning those jump balls. Great lineup piece. You could argue he deserves to be higher on this list. I just think that based on what that team is doing right now, they're trying to be very balanced. Ken Walker's got a huge part of that offense. He's got Ty Lockett in that situation as well. The ceiling for these other players may be a bit higher, but let's not get it twisted here. DK Metcalf brings a lot of value to the table here in what he ends up providing to this team. And your teams, as a matter of fact. All right, another chunky tier here. Our wide receivers 14 to 18 in this particular category. So kicking it off with Chris Godwin, yet another player. So much opportunity, so much upside, so much opportunity for better floor value even. Just not capitalizing. 62 targets in his last 6 games. That's 10 plus per contest. We need to see better. Again, it's drops, it's sloppy football, sloppy routes from this group as a whole, and it's just been a trickle-down effect. Tom has not been able to have the timing we typically see him have with teams. He has not had the pinpoint accuracy because players aren't in the right spot. There's been a lot of dirting the football, if you will, a term that Josh Allen brought up a couple weeks back where he got picked off by a Packer trying to dirt the ball. Tom has been dirting the ball successfully. He's actually about to break the all-time consecutive passes record without an interception. Put the freaking ball in harm's way, Tom. We love you. Give us some opportunities for these guys to make plays, and hopefully they'll go out there and end up doing it. Chris Olave, by the way, Chris Godwin is a player that has a solid rest of season schedule. Not great, though. Chris Olave into a guy that does have a very solid rest of season schedule. He is the alpha wide receiver. I said this every week, but I feel like it constantly needs to be brought back up because we don't really think of a rookie receiver like that. And he is that guy, though. Jarvis Landry is not that guy. Jarvis is active and off the injury report, expected to be available for Week 10's game. Please start Chris Olave every single week from this point going forward, essentially. This is such a strong route runner. If you saw his, there's a graphic circulating Twitter today while I'm recording this on Friday afternoon. He is literally having an above average success rate, on every single route he's running. Like, he is getting open at will. He is so smooth, fast. He is unlike the Bucs receivers right now, he is where the quarterback wants him to be every time the quarterback looks for him to be in that place. So, such great opportunities here. Such a solid, talented player. Love Olave and what he brings to lineups. Debo, a guy whose stock is down a little bit right now, has a really great strength of schedule the rest of the season. I don't know how much that matters because of his unorthodox role, but to an extent, it should matter a little bit. He's not necessarily running routes downfield at a high level here, but he is a guy, I shouldn't say at a high level, at a high volume level per se. He's more of a line of scrimmage type player or a run after catch type piece. But regardless, the strength of schedule is very good for Debo here. I still think he's the wide receiver 1 in San Francisco. He may no longer be a fantasy football wide receiver 1, but that upside is still there on a weekly basis. Amari Cooper here, a player who could see his ceiling and floor value elevated with the insertion of Deshaun Watson into this offense. That is a big deal for his fantasy value. He's been a very solid, high ceiling player, though, at the wide receiver 2 position with Jacoby Brissett in the lineup. For Amari Cooper, it is an average strength of schedule moving forward. For Ty Lockett here, this is a guy that has had 6 double-digit production games in half PPR out of 9 available contests leading into Week 10. That's really dang good. 66% of the time, he's getting you starting level lineup numbers. I love to see that, and this is a guy that you can depend on at that wide receiver 2 spot. He's shown us this all year. Geno Smith has been that guy for him. He still hasn't written back, and this Seahawks offense is honestly something awesome to watch every single week. All right, diving into Tier 6 now, kicking it off with Juju Smith-Schuster. Good old Juju. We did a lot of talking about Juju this week. This is our wide receivers 19 to 21 for Week 10 here, for our rest of season rankings for Week 10. But for Juju Smith-Schuster, talking about how I think he has established and asserted himself as this team's number 1 receiving option behind Travis Kelce. So at the wide receiver labeled position, the number 1 asset there for this team. Season high 12 targets. He's being very involved. A lot of safety blanket-like opportunities for him. Loving the usage, involvement, and overall everything checks out and is great here except for his terrible rest of season and even worse playoff schedule for this season. Jamar Chase. Injuries. That's the only reason he's down here. I really don't need to say much more than that. I expect him to be back in Week 13 against Kansas City, or at least that's the target date that I'm hoping for here. It'll be a question of if his hip can hold up after returning from that point in time. For Jamar, the schedule is an above average opportunity for him as it is for T. Higgins moving forward. For Christian Kirk, an average schedule for him. Loving that he's kind of having a resurgence here as of late. I think he's got a nice opportunity here in Week 10 against Kansas City for a negative game script and a whole lot more targets heading his direction. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be the number 1 receiver in terms of target volume, if you're going to be the guy soaking up those slot opportunities, getting those red zone looks, I like that, and he's been doing that to this point in the season. Had a bit of a lull in the middle part of the year up until this point, but he's starting to kind of flash back and revert back to those nicer numbers from earlier in the year. He had 17 points against the Raiders in Week 9. All right, so I just realized I had an extra tier in here this whole time that I did not need. So Tier 7, second to last here, our wide receivers, 22 to 26. Allen Lazard kicking off this list. Now, the reason he's up here is this Packers team is in a whole lot of negative game scripts. This week against Dallas, I'm expecting one. The next week, they've got the Tennessee Titans. The week after that, I forget their matchup, but it's at Philadelphia. So, negative game script, negative game script, negative game script, potentially, and this is the clear-cut wide receiver 1 for this offense. Romeo Doubs is out for 4 to 6 weeks. High ankle sprain. Bad news bear there. So you're talking about more volume from Allen Lazard, not a super high-level player or a super elite prospect from an just overall talent perspective, but he can get the job done. Aaron Rodgers will force him the ball enough times to get production up on the table. That's what you're looking for here. Gabe Davis coming down to Josh Allen health. Again, he's averaging just 5.4 targets per game this season. Hasn't been the most dependable floor player. Actually, he's been incredibly unreliable in terms of his fantasy floor, but we know how talented he is. He's a very good number 2 receiver. He has an extremely high ceiling in terms of what he brings to the table every week. So for Gabe Davis, it's an opportunity thing, and overall, if his quarterback is healthy, they'll keep slinging it. If he's not, I've got some question marks. DJ Moore, super talented, not in a great situation. PJ Walker helps. PJ Walker is not guaranteed at the end of the day, and this is still a low passing volume offense as it currently stands here. At the end of the day, this is a bad situation, a bad quarterback in general. You know, PJ Walker is the best of, or the lesser of the evils, if you will, in terms of Baker and Sam Darnold, it appears at this point in time. So what you're looking at here is just hoping he can make big plays down the field. He's got an average strength of schedule the rest of the way. Devontae Smith, the number 25 wide receiver position here. A guy who is a boomer bust wide receiver 2 essentially every week he hits the field. He does have the opportunity to go ballistic. He's extremely talented. See Week 3 against Washington Commanders. But at the end of the day, A.J. Brown is the alpha in this offense. This is still, I would argue, a run-first football team, and it just comes down to capitalizing on the minimal, at times, opportunities he gets. Terry McLaurin, number 26 here. He's an unreliable wide receiver too. Another team with bad quarterback play. The question for me is if Carson Wentz gets healthy, that thumb heals, do they go back to Carson or do they stick with Heineke moving forward? It is my belief Heineke is more beneficial for McLaurin's fantasy value. He is not afraid to force the ball to his wide receiver 1 in this offense. Last up here, Tier 8. Kicking it off, wide receivers 27 to 30. Brandon Ayuk in that juicy schedule. We talked about it earlier with Deebo Samuel. I do think this benefits Ayuk more than Deebo because he's a more pure route runner for this team, therefore adding more of a contribution to his downfield passing opportunities. But still, to me, he's the third or fourth option in this offense. Deebo and CMC are number 1 and 2. It's between Ayuk and Kittle for that third and fourth spot. So he's going to be streaky. His floor is not great. The ceiling, though, is a player that can make plays and is exceptionally talented. Jacoby Myers here, number 28. This is a high-end flex with a respectable fantasy floor. Doesn't have elite quarterback play, but he can sit down, find the hole in zone coverage, and get you points. I mean, not the flashiest play in the world again. Probably never or once a season. He kind of already had his moment this year, a 2-touchdown game, in my estimation at least. I'd be shocked to see that happen again. He is not going to go out there and win you your weekly matchup. This is a guy that is in there to be a plug-and-play, high-floor player that you don't have to sweat it out and worry about. He'll have his stinkers here and there, despite being a high-floor asset. Just everyone in fantasy has them, but at the end of the day, I do feel comfortable as the wide receiver 1 in his offense, what he brings to my lineups and PPR formats. Jerry Jeudy, I've got him above Courtland Sutton rest of season. Why? The last 4 games, he's had 7 or more targets. This is a guy who seems to be on the uptick right now, while Courtland Sutton has 2 games in the last 4 contests played under 5 targets. So the volume is heading Jerry's way. I think he's the better route runner still to this day, and I just think that going forward, there might be an opportunity for him to see more involvement consistently in this passing game. So if that plays out and comes to fruition, he will be the more valuable asset. Sutton's value has fallen a long way from where it started in the first month of this season. And currently today, he is my wide receiver 31 after Michael Pittman, we're going to talk about in a second here. And for those of you wondering where Deontay Johnson is or George Pickens, they are 32 and 33. So barely missing the cutoff. They are still startable players in 12-plus man formats. I say that asterisk. I don't know if you heard that or not. I tried to inflect it in my voice. But basically, if you're in a deeper format, playing PPR, need some upside, you can flex them. They are not wide receiver 2s at this point in the season, though. And then Mike Pittman, Jeff Saturday, Sam Ellinger. Do I need to say more? He's very talented. In terms of dynasty, he might be a buy low right now, but the situation is very ugly for the rest of 2022, and I don't know how much we can rely on, depend, or trust him. A couple months ago, he's my wide receiver 11, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that range. I forget exactly what it was, but he was in the wide receiver 1 discussion. Today, we are looking at him as a wide receiver 3. So things change fast in the NFL. Got to be available to pivot and make changes to your fantasy roster, and that is ultimately what we must do going forward here. So there you have it, top 30 wide receiver rankings and tiers here for Week 10, at least our rest of season rankings as of Week 10. We're updating these live on the website, as always, sizzlefantasy.com if you want to check them out on there. Quarterbacks, tight ends, receivers, running backs, defenses as well. So go check all that stuff out. As always, let me know your questions in the comment section below, and check out our Week 10 playlist live up on the channel right now. I'll see you there. Peace out.